We learn best when we are met with flexibility, not formulas. Now, if human teachers can work this out, don't you think God could too? When was the last time you tried to learn something completely new? Did you map it out with a diagram or a chart? Or read a written summary? Or just roll up your sleeves and figure it out for yourself, hands-on? Modern educational research tells us that learning styles aren't rigid boxes. We don't learn in a vacuum. We use a shifting mix of visual, auditory, textual, and practical methods. This depends both on the task at hand, but also on our own innate learning styles. So what might learning styles tell us about the Bible? I've spent most of my career teaching in one form or another, including time as a high school music teacher and a one-on-one piano tutor. If a student doesn't grasp a musical concept, a good teacher doesn't blame the student's inherent depravity. They change their teaching style. They translate the lessons into concepts and activities the student can actually process. So let me introduce you to Samuel. Samuel was one of my first students and a gifted piano player, as it turned out. But as a boy with Asperger's syndrome, he was also something of a challenge to teach. I discovered very quickly that if Samuel thought I was criticizing him, he would immediately descend into a meltdown and the rest of our lesson was lost. Now just sit with that problem for a moment. How do you correct someone if you can't tell them they're doing something wrong? On one occasion, I asked Samuel's parents to buy a specific book for the music it contained. The book was called Easy Piano Pieces. We started learning one of the pieces in the book. Samuel didn't find it easy. So he followed his own rigid logic. This book says this music is easy. I'm not finding this easy at all. Therefore, I must be stupid. As I should have realized, this triggered another meltdown. So again, how do you correct someone if you can't tell them they're doing something wrong? Hold on to that question, because it is the exact same challenge the divine faces with humanity. And we'll return to Samuel's story at the end. In the old theological framework, the Bible is treated like an absolute, unchanging user manual dropped directly out of heaven. If the text describes God commanding an ethnic cleansing, endorsing slavery, or treating women as property, you're told to accept it blindly because God's ways are higher than ours. But the 18th century scientist and philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg offers an alternative lens. He pointed out that divine truth is far too vast for direct human comprehension. Therefore, if God is to speak to humanity, it can only be done using our own cultural currency, the specific images, norms, and accepted ideas of our time. He must speak to us where we are. Of course, this is not a popular idea with evangelicals, nor indeed with anyone who assumes that they can hold the key to absolute, infinite divine truth. But Swedenborg calls this realization accommodation, and it's a concept that completely healed my own understanding of Scripture. Think about a child going through the terrible twos. When an infant is throwing a tantrum, asserting their ego, you don't read them a clinical textbook on emotional maturity. You meet them in their playground state. You set basic, protective boundaries. Much of the Old Testament reflects a spiritual low point in human history. Humanity was operating under the laws of the playground, a cycle of escalating, unchecked revenge. Because ancient cultures could only conceive of ultimate authority through the persona of a terrifying warlord, God accommodated that immaturity. The divine accepted the appearance of the great psychopath so that he could step into our playground and gently de-escalate the violence. He limited their blood feuds to a strict eye for an eye, then moved them to leaving justice to God, and finally led us, through the teachings of Jesus, to the concept of forgiveness. When you view Scripture through the gentle lens of accommodation, the old anxieties dissolve. The patriarchy, the violence, and the legalism are not reflections of God's true character. They are reflections of human immaturity that God patiently worked with so that he could lead us towards love. So let's get back to Samuel. If I was going to get anywhere at all, I had to work with him and certainly not tell him how silly his behaviour was. I had to notice the problem without saying anything about it, and then make it a game or an experiment. Try this. See if you can copy me. How does it sound if we play it this way? Breaking down each problem into small, manageable steps. Then finally, when he got it right, I could say, "Well done, that's the way to do it," and really rub in the praise. That is how I understand the divine operates with us. God doesn't stand over you with a clipboard, shaming you because the easy parts of life feel incredibly hard. God meets us in our current spiritual state, breaks our growth down into manageable steps, and celebrates every single inch of progress we make. The divine doesn't care whether you process your spiritual walk through scholarly historical criticism or through coloured pencils. When you look back at your own religious upbringing, what was the specific one-size-fits-all doctrine that felt the most crushing to your learning style or personal intelligence? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Thanks for watching.